Well, good afternoon and welcome to Monday Meditations. This is the time of the week that I get on and just share some additional thoughts, either from the Sunday message or the passages, or add some thoughts there from those. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Hey, there's the video. I'm so glad you're here watching or listening. I noticed as I was rewatching the message from yesterday, I do that as part of the preparation for these meditations on Mondays. I noticed that we had a little bit of a technical difficulty yesterday, so we've got the YouTube version going up right now. It'll be uploaded on YouTube, the full message from yesterday, along with the sermon notes, the link to the YouVersion app notes section there for the message. So that'll be up this afternoon on our YouTube page. So if you're joining us on Facebook Live or YouTube this afternoon, welcome. Yesterday I talked about Abram and Melchizedek. Abram had gone to rescue his nephew Lot, along with the spoils of the king of the king Chedorlaomer had overtaken and defeated the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as three other kings, and they pillaged Sodom and Gomorrah. They took Lot, his family, and all of his goods, and they went to the mountains. They actually ran quite a ways away. And Abram gathered together his army. He went and he pursued them. He overtook them. He took back everything that was stolen. He rescued his nephew Lot and his family who had been kidnapped and brought them back. And when he comes back, Hebrews chapter 7 describes this. That's where we spent the majority of the time yesterday after reading the story in Genesis chapter 14 of what took place. We went to Hebrews chapter 7, and the writer of Hebrews describes Melchizedek and talks about him, and we're going to read part of that here right now. But he goes into detail saying that the priest who would come in the order of Melchizedek was in fact Jesus Christ. We read several references out of Hebrews chapter 4 and Hebrews chapter 5, and the entire chapter of Hebrews 7 goes into great detail about Jesus being that great high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And we touched on this portion just a tiny bit yesterday out of Genesis 14, and really today I want to focus on the tithe portion of this story. And Hebrews 7:1 begins with this: "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abram gave a tenth part of all." First being translated, this is speaking of Melchizedek, king of righteousness. That's what Melchizedek translated means, is king of righteousness. And then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy. None of these are described in the scriptures. Genesis does not describe who his mother was, who his father was, where he came from. And this is the only reference to Melchizedek in Genesis, in the Old Testament, other than the prophetic word in Psalm 110 that there would be another who would come in the order of Melchizedek. It says, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was. This is the writer of Hebrews speaking to the people that he was writing to. Consider how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils That's what a tithe is. A tithe is a tenth of whatever it is, whether it's spoils here or an increase or a harvest or a paycheck, whatever a tithe is a tenth of whatever it is we're describing. Here it was the spoils. Verse 5 continues, and indeed, those who are of the sons of Levi, who receive the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Remember, I talked about this yesterday. Abram was already blessed by God. Abram was already very prosperous. He had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of sheep, he had a lot of servants. It says that he gathered up 314 armed men who were born in his household, in his house, as part of his servants, a part of his employees there, that he had a large number of people that were part of his business operation. He was already blessed. And he already had the promise of God. God had began to promise Abraham, or Abram at this point. We still haven't seen his name changed in Genesis 14 yet. That comes later. But Abram had already received multiple promises from God, multiple blessings from God, prophetic words from God of things that were going to take place that he had not yet seen happen. It says that Melchizedek, verse 6, blessed Abraham who had the promises. Now, beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the better, verse 7 says. Here mortal men receive tithes, but there he receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. You see, the tithe was established in the Mosaic law for the people of Israel to support the Levites. The Levites in the Promised Land, as the people are coming out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan, into the Promised Land, God would give certain parcels of land to each and every tribe except for the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi didn't have specific land. They lived among their brethren in the various areas. And so, because the Levites were assigned to care for the house of God, initially the tabernacle, and then the temple, and then the synagogues, they were given the duty of serving the Lord. And in an agricultural society without land and without full time being able to tend the land and till the land and harvest the land, the Levites and the priests relied upon the tithes in order to survive. That's how they were supported. Much like I, as a pastor now, am supported by the tithes and the offerings that are given to the church. That's how I receive my salary today. The Levites were the same. They lived on the tithes that were given by God, commanded by God to be given through the law of Moses. And we see that the writer of Hebrews is saying, yes, the Levites and the priests live off of the tithes of and the offerings of the people, but there was one who received tithes outside of the law, outside of the Mosaic law, and that was this priest and king Melchizedek, who received tithes from Abram before Levi, his grandson, his great grandson, actually, was even born, and way before over 400 years before the Mosaic law was given by God to Moses for the Levites to receive the tithes. We see that this honoring God, honoring the man of God, was already established. The tithe was already established well ahead of the law, and so we see that the greater blesses the lesser, meaning even though God had blessed Abram, God had made promises to Abram, Melchizedek in this instance was greater than he, because he is the one that blessed Abram. He spoke a blessing over him. Yes, Abram gave a tithe to him, but Melchizedek blessed Abram during this story, during this time. And so we see this establishment of the tithe, the giving to God, giving to the priest of God here in this. Now we no longer have a need of priests to be the one to go between us and God. Thankfully, like we talked about yesterday, the message was that Jesus is this high priest. Jesus is our high priest, a great high priest, the writer of Hebrews says. And now we can come to God directly. We don't have to go through a priest or a pastor or someone else. We don't have to go to the temple to worship God. We can worship God wherever we are. Wherever you are right now, you can worship God. Why? Because Jesus made a way. He is and always will be our great high priest, our mediator, our intercessor between us and God. And so we can go directly to the throne room of grace, the writer of Hebrews said, and find help and grace and mercy in our time of need. We can go straight to him. But we see here in this portion of the story in Hebrews chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, that this establishment of the tithe was preceding the law of Moses, and therefore it would also, it seems, go past, the law of Moses, that it would last longer than the law of Moses, the concept of the tithe or the tenth, that being our offering to God through the people of God, through the servants of God. And so I encourage you. Tithing has been a part of my worship, a part of our practice as a family. From the time that I got my very first paycheck, I've tithed. Every check I've ever received, I give a tithe, a tenth, to the Lord through the local church. And I believe, just personally, this is what I've always done, and this is what I believe uh, scripturally based that we should do, is a tithe is given to your local church, whatever body, whatever congregation that you're a part of. You give your tithe there, and your offerings are over and above that. We give and support missionaries personally over and above our tithe. We give offerings and support to the church over and above our tithe, but our tithe is given to the church specifically, that we're a part of, that we're going to, that we're established in, that we're connected to, and that we're supporting, to be able to support what God is doing in the local body where we're called to be. And this has been a practice of ours. This is what I do personally and have done, like I said, ever since my very first paycheck, many, many years ago now. I've tithed, and it's just been a practice of my worship. And I encourage you to do so as well. I encourage you to trust God with the tithe, to trust God. Malachi chapter 3 says, test me. The only time that it's okay to test God in the scriptures, God says, test me in this, that if I will not pour out the blessings of heaven and rain down blessings on you, if you'll bring the tithe into the storehouse, if you'll bring the tithe into the house of God, will I not bless you, is what God says. And so I want to encourage you to trust the Lord with the tithe, to trust God to be your provider, to trust God that He will provide for every one of your needs according to His riches and glory by Christ Jesus, as you trust Him with your tithe, as you trust Him with a tenth of what you increase, however that is, whether it's interest or dividends or paycheck or retirement, whatever your increase is, that you would trust Him with that, and in the like manner support what God is doing locally through wherever you are connected to, wherever you are plugged into and receive from on a weekly, regular basis. Do that. And I believe that God will bless you richly as you're obedient and trust Him and place your faith in Him and nothing else for our sustenance, for our provision. That doesn't mean you don't go to work, right? That I give out of my paycheck, I give out of my earnings, and so as we do that, God increases us and He blesses us, and He blesses us to be a blessing to others. I hope this blesses you today, and I hope you're encouraged.